Welcome back to Parliament House. The federal government has put a 5-year freeze on any major changes to superannuation tax policy. It's designed in part to neutralise the opposition's argument that super's not safe under Labor, and it closely matches the coalition's promise to have no unexpected detrimental changes to super in its first term if it wins office. Labor says it would legislate the change along with introducing a superannuation charter and council. I spoke earlier to the Shadow Assistant Treasurer, Matthias Cormann. Matthias Cormann, welcome to Capitol Hill. If I could ask you first, the government's announced that it would put a 5-year freeze on major tax changes to superannuation. Is that a good way to provide some stability in the system?
Well, it would be a good way if it was true. But what the Labor Party, of course, is doing today is play catch-up with the coalition's long-standing commitment, just with 5 minutes to go before the election, because clearly they've realised that our commitment not to make any detrimental, unexpected changes to superannuation is so popular. And of course, the other point that I would make is that Kevin Rudd has said all this before. When he last took Labor to the election as leader of the Labor Party, he promised not to make any changes to superannuation. Not one jot, not one tittle is what he said. And of course he broke that promise immediately after that election in his first budget, in every subsequent budget, initiating a massive ramp-up in taxes on superannuation, increasing taxes on super by almost $9 billion along the way.
The government, though, the Treasurer, though, says this would come in concert with legislation to establish a superannuation council, a super council that has a charter as well, and the 5-year freeze before any changes would be enshrined in legislation. If it was enshrined in legislation, that would be difficult to change, wouldn't it?
Well, so the government is promising that there will be LAW promises, law, that is going to be in the law. Well, I mean, in the lead up to the last election, Labor promised there'd be no carbon tax under a government led by Julia Gillard, and we got one. Now, in the last few weeks, what we've seen from Kevin Rudd is he knows that people want to see the end of the carbon tax, so he promises to scrap the carbon tax, even though he doesn't. He knows that people are concerned about Labor's failure to protect our borders, so he promises just before the election to improve protections at our borders, except that he doesn't know how to do it. And of course, he knows that people are concerned about all of the chopping and changing to superannuation under the current government over the past 6 years, all of the increased taxes eroding people's retirement savings. So here he is, 5 minutes to go to the election, and he's promising no changes to superannuation. But of course, we have been here before. He has promised this before, and he has broken those promises before. With Kevin Rudd, it is not what he says, it is what he does that matters.
If we can look at what you say you will do, you are promising your own detrimental changes to superannuation, announcing them before the election. We already know that you would pause the increase in the superannuation guarantee charge, you would take away tax concessions for low-income earners, and there are possibly other elements, aren't there, that you might change that will be detrimental changes and will change the system.
Well, Lyndal, and that is exactly the difference between us and the Labor Party. Unlike the Labor Party, we are open and transparent about the things that we will and the things that we will not do in relation to superannuation.
But you can hardly criticise the government for making changes when you're planning your own changes. That will be detrimental.
No, but hang on. The government today has promised no change. What I'm pointing out is that the government has promised no change before, only to increase taxes on superannuation by almost $9 billion. What we are saying on our side is there will be no unexpected detrimental changes under the coalition. For better or for worse, we've put forward all of our proposals for positive change, and we've also said very clearly what adjustments we think we need to make to superannuation policy settings in the context of fiscal settings that we're facing. Now, in relation to compulsory super,
that would be detrimental.
Yes. Well, but we're being, unlike Labor, we're being open and transparent before the election about what we will and will not do. We are saying before the election that as far as the increase in compulsory super is concerned, we will delay the full phase-in to 12% by 2 years, so that we would get there by 2021 instead of getting there by 2019. That will help us fund income tax cuts and pension increases without a carbon tax, which of course will help reduce cost of living pressures on families, and it will also help businesses with reduced cost of doing business, and it will help them keep people employed.
Are you done with announcing all your changes to superannuation, or are you going to look at things like concessional caps and co-contributions for low-income earners?
Well, what we've said as a matter of principle is that we in government would like to revisit concessional contribution caps and super co-contribution benefits for low-income earners, which are both too low after 6 years of Labor cuts, if and as soon as the budget is in a strong enough position to afford that. Now, we are quite hopeful that we will have enough of a sense of the true state of the budget before the election, after the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook has been released, to be able to make some judgments before the election about what that might mean in terms of quantum and timeline. But our commitment is to revisit concessional contribution caps and super co-contribution benefits for low-income earners as soon as the budget is in a strong enough position to afford it. And of course, that very much depends on the situation that we will face after the next election.
So you're putting enough faith in the pre-election fiscal outlook to be able to base those decisions on?
Well, we're not putting as much faith into the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook as we did a few weeks ago, because of course now what is very apparent is that Kevin Rudd and Chris Bowen are setting out to bully the Treasury into a set of figures by releasing the economic statement and the budget update just before calling the election, as it appears that the government is proposing to do. The political objective, of course, of that is to lock the Secretaries of Treasury and Finance into a set of figures in time before calling the election. Now, look, I mean, if the Secretaries of Treasury and Finance had been left to their own devices in making a proper independent judgment in all of that, we would have had great faith in that. But of course,
you can't say now that they will not make their own judgments and issue their own document, and they are senior, experienced public servants. Can't they make their own decisions, and can't you put your faith in them, as you will have to put your faith in them after the election if you win?
Well, let's be very clear. Everything that we said about Wayne Swan's budget in May has come true. We said that he overestimated revenue, and it turns out he did. We said that he underestimated expenditure, and he did. Within 2 weeks of the budget being delivered by Wayne Swan, the Secretary of Treasury in Senate estimates conceded that the revenue estimates in the budget were based on an overestimation of our terms of trade. Now, what we're saying is that there is only one objective why Kevin Rudd and Chris Bowen will release this budget update before the election. That is because they want to manage the politics of Labor's mismanagement of the budget before calling the election. And the purpose of all of that is to have the minimum amount of time between that budget update prepared with the input from Treasury and the ultimate pre-election economic and fiscal outlook. Clearly, that is to minimise the risk of there being a significant discrepancy between what the government has put out there and what Treasury is putting out there.
Will the coalition give to the Australian people an overview of how much its policies will cost and what the likely impact is on the budget?
We will have our policies properly costed. We already have costed many policies through the Parliamentary Budget Office, and we will be releasing a detailed overview of the fiscal position, the fiscal framework of our pre-election commitments.
One final question. Joe Hockey has said that he is getting help from your state colleagues in putting together costings. Do you know if any state taxpayers are paying for the costing of your policies?
Well, I mean, I don't think that there's anything surprising in the proposition that Joe Hockey and Mike Baird, or Joe Hockey and Troy Buswell, or Joe Hockey and Colin Barnett, for that matter, would have conversations about, that are relevant to, our costings at a federal level. Unlike the Labor Party, we are committed to working cooperatively with our colleagues at the state level. And of course, these sorts of conversations have already been taking place, and I'm sure they'll continue to take place this side of the election and after the election.
Matthias Cormann, thank you very much for your time.
Always good to talk to you.
And that's Australia Votes for today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Stay with us on ABC News 24 for The Drum with Julia Baird. Good night.